Greetings, my dear friends. It's exciting to see you. In case we haven't met before, I'm Stephen Clements, a writer, a gamer, and an enjoyer of big brain activities in general. On this channel, I perform dramatic story readings, I provide role-playing game and movie reviews, and I talk to interesting people. In this episode, we're delving deep into an RPG review, R1, Into the Great Rift. But we're also talking to an interesting person. It's author Joseph Bloch, also known as Greyhawk Grognard, who runs a fantastic YouTube channel. So we're going to do a review and partial walkthrough of the module, and then our dear friend Joseph Bloch is going to join us for a conversation. And even if you're not into role-playing games, stick around because there are some wonderful vistas Joe Bloch's going to paint for us in our minds. R1, Into the Great Rift, is written in the style of Advanced Dungeons & Dragons 1st edition modules, and this adventure can be dropped into most published settings and used with any old school system like D&D Basic, both Advanced Dungeons & Dragons editions, and many retro clones like Dungeon Crawl Classics, and Bloch's own interpretation of how Gary Gygax may have planned for the game to develop, Adventures Dark and Deep. R1 is the beginning of the 3-part Rift series, and all 3 volumes are out now, and I will eventually review the other 2. Now let's see how this thing sells itself. A Greyheim Adventures module, the Great Rift, sits as a tear in the very fabric of the earth. Home to monsters and outlaws, it is shunned by all but the most desperate or foolish. Recently, however, a band of brigands returned to the town of Cleftwall, laden with treasures that they claimed were found in caverns in the Great Rift that were exposed by a recent earthquake. But they also gave warning that the riches were obtained at great cost, for many strange creatures lurk in those caves. You and your companions have heard these rumors and decided to investigate. With the promise of great riches, even the dangers of the Great Rift can be overcome. Designed for 4 to 6 player characters or PCs of levels 5 to 7, the hack factor can go up really fast and really hard in this one, and the party will be very far away from anybody that could help them, so the PCs are going to need to have some ass on them. Like Bloch's other modules, R1 is written in an old school style of presenting interesting locations to the DM, briefly describing the NPCs who can be found there and their motivations, and a basic reason why the players would care. In this case, that reason is a chance to explore the unexplored and loot. Because in older editions of D&D, loot actually meant something. Loot could by itself level you up. And I like this style of module because the DM doesn't have to railroad anything or keep plot armor on certain NPCs because, as written, the module has to have those NPCs survive to a certain point in the story. No, this is interesting locations, interesting people, basic motivation for the party to get out there. Now go. Take it, make it yours. Like the highly replayable module, the Isle of Dread, most of the story that emerges will be unique to each playthrough, as the players will drive what happens with their choices on a largely open playing field, uncluttered by preloaded narratives. And there are no wrong options so long as you survive. For credits, we have Joe, who wrote it, edited it, made the maps, and he graciously invited me to edit the second printing of R1. So if you spot a typo or problem in the text now, you can blame me. It was an honor to assist such a skilled writer that the credit alone was fine by me, but Joe insisted on paying me for the work. In the interest of full disclosure, I have no ongoing financial interest in this module. I just really like it and want more people to know about it, to know what makes it so cool. And honestly, that payment went right back into Joe's pocket and into the pockets of other independent creators like David Hubbard and Chris Clark. For art, we have the one piece of public domain art on the cover. While there's no art beyond the cover and the maps, that cover piece still sets the scene. I found Joe's written descriptions so evocative, I didn't miss not having more illustrations in the rest of the module. And that is what I can tell you without getting into any spoilers. So from here on out, as we dig into the details, here is your spoiler warning. If you're a forever or regular DM, feel free to come along. If you're a normie player, send it to your DM. But what would be even better is if you press ahead, get a copy for yourself, and then run this as a one-shot for the guy who does all the work so you can sit back and play your one character. This is basically a sandbox campaign, and I do mean campaign. In 10 pages plus maps, what's here can be run as is for multiple sessions, or if the DM adds a little bit to each location, this thing could easily be padded for 6 months of interesting play. I want to read you this first paragraph from the introduction because I feel this does a good job of setting a kind of Wild West feel to what we're about to get into. This module is the first in a series of adventures taking place in, around, and under the Great Rift. an enormous canyon more than 100 miles long, situated in the middle of an area of badlands and wastes in the heart of the Brigand Realms. Aside from silver mines that are only sporadically worked, the region is known for little more than its fierce monsters, including undead in certain areas. So we are in a tough place to begin with. We have this big, inhospitable badland of a canyon, and that's where the treasure's at. And it happens to sit in the heart of the Brigand Realms. Oh, that's concerning. The Brigand Realms, as in there's no law and order aside from what you can enforce within the reach of your swing, and the place is overrun with brigands and bandits. And apparently there is a difference between the two, as is explored in the nuances of the module. There are some treasures to be had here, like the silver mines, but the place is also overrun with monsters and undead. So the threat level is high from all around. And the players start by already knowing the adventure hook in the rough outpost town of Cleftwall, which sits right on a ledge above the Great Rift below. If the players want to go straight for the caves, they can get down to the rift floor by either taking a rope and pulley elevator or walking. The elevator is way faster, taking about 30 minutes, but it does cost 2 gold per person, where spending a whole day walking down a dangerous path you could fall from is free. Now, if the PCs want to ferret out intel on what lies ahead, there are rumors that can be mined. A few are false, but most of them are helpful, so it could save some adventurers' lives to buy a few drinks and hear what loose lips have to say. The party may also want to ask about conditions on the rift floor, because exploring it will be a rough terrain slog fraught with dangers, both from bestial predators and desperate people. Here's how Bloch describes the land. The floor is arid and rocky, with many boulders, small clefts and rises, sudden drops, and the like. Small scrub bushes, clumps of wiry grass, and scraggly trees dot the landscape. Water is scarce, but rain collects in several lakes which are shallow but drinkable. There are several paths the PCs can take to go from Cleftwall to the location of the rock slide, and if a guide is hired in Cleftwall, there is a 1 in 6 chance the guide will be in league with bandits who will ambush the party, and a further 1 in 6 chance the guide will be a 4th level thief who will attempt to rob and then abandon the PCs at night. The GM should take care to keep track of food and water during the journey, as there are no places within the rift itself to replenish food, and once inside the dungeon and beyond, sources of water may also be difficult to find. So survival and resource management will be important here, and the party that is prepared for it will have the best chance of getting out alive. With a 10-mile-a-day average pace and 20 miles per day if they're lucky, the most direct route from Cleftwall to the cave that is the focus of the adventure is 45 miles, so 4.5 days for most parties and as quickly as 2 days travel for the fast. That's assuming all goes well, because the hostile terrain and distance involved allow for a lot of things to go wrong. We get a custom random encounter table with prospectors, bandits, brigands, giants, lucrota, gargoyles, mist, and more. And this thing yields some neat and spooky details. I found this language increasing my sense of immersion. Nighttime encounters with prospectors, men, or giants will be sightings of a campfire 1 to 8/8ths of a mile away. That one line helps me see the empty, nocturnal badlands lit only sparsely by lonely campfires, by the humanoids that can't see in the dark, but are desperate enough to be out here. And this mist random encounter, check this out. Mist. A cold, dense fog suddenly arises that obscures all vision, including infravision. The mist extends 100 to 400 yards and lasts for 1 to 10 turns. Roll for random encounters again. If indicated, the encounter is in the mist. If mist is indicated again, there will be sounds of creatures moving in armor, but no actual creatures will be present. What's that about? So we have haunted mist at the bottom of the Grand Canyon. Now, that's something I was not expecting to see. Encounter key lists the named locations on the map and is about 1.5 pages long, but we get 21 locations in that 1.5 pages. While most get no more than 1 paragraph, the writing is so efficient and evocative that my imagination led me to believe this section was so much longer than it actually was. My mind instantly took the hooks and expanded on them. This is why I say this module could easily be a campaign on its own, and let's do some math. Scattered around the tors, defiles, and trails of the rift, we get 21 named locations. Say the party clears 3 per session, plus random encounters and taking survival considerations into account. Not counting the 1 location that receives a fully developed dungeon, that would take 7 sessions to clear the list if the DM adds absolutely nothing to what's written. And there's plenty of room to add to what's written. To give you a sampling of what there is to discover, I picked out 6 locations to show you the variety of what's on offer. Location 3, Silver Mesa. Named for the exposed veins of silver that used to adorn the southern side, this mesa is around 1,000 feet tall. The northwest side is a gentle enough slope that it can be scaled, although slowly and with difficulty. It is the site of several silver mines, now tapped out. 5. Centaur Mesa. So named for the outline of a centaur that some see along the east of the mesa. Centaur Mesa is around 1,500 feet high. There are no trails to the top of the mesa, but it can be climbed by someone with skill in rock climbing or mountaineering. 9. Ambush. A large band of raiders is camped in this region of rough hills and steep gullies. They have lookouts posted in various places and are usually looking for parties traveling to Faralloes to the southwest, but will take on any group they feel can be overcome, but will not kill their victims unless necessary. It is not impossible to get the raiders on the side of the PCs, with promises of future treasure in return for aid in exploring the caverns. But negotiations could be tricky. They are led by Ferrock, a Techite cavalier, and his second-in-command, Rent, a halfling renegade from Ulick, who is fanatically loyal to Ferrock. Each has saved the other's life more than once. The main body of raiders is composed of 20 level 0 fighters armed with spear and shield, and 3 first-level fighters as sergeants armed with light crossbow and axe. None are mounted. The band as a whole is a cachet of a chunk of gold, even more silver, and a bunch of gems. Now this Faralloes, what is that thing? Well, location 10. The ruins of an ancient Flynn city built into the very walls of the canyon. For purposes of this adventure, it is inaccessible, but the GM may wish to detail it for his own campaign. Oh, come on, man. You can't give me D&D Petra and that's all. Location 12, Panther Valley. The slopes of this small valley are climbable, and the lowest point on the floor of the valley is a further quarter-mile lower than the rest of the Great Lift's lower floor. Camping in the valley has the advantage that campfires will not be spotted from most angles. However, the valley is haunted by a ghost panther, whence it gets its name, that will attack those who camp here at night, 1 time in 4. If pressed, the panther will become immaterial and retreat. So we have a flavorful description of the location. We have a reason the players might want to go there because they'll be better able to hide at night from predators. And then we get some cool undead panther that I'd never heard of before. This is the kind of stuff I'm talking about. Location 15, Boulay Mesa. Named for the beast that some people see in the outline of the mesa, the top of the mesa rises 3,500 feet above the floor. The top is accessible via a trail along the south edge, which goes about 7 miles to reach the top. A large tribe of Aarakocra nests on the cliffs on the eastern edge of the mesa, while on the western tip, a large flock of gargoyles and margoyles alight on the narrow ledges there. The top of the mesa is also home to a now ruined shrine dedicated to the god of metal, mines, and smiths. And there's other locations like this where you have humanoids and related monstrous species that have intelligence that parties could bargain with, interact with, accept quests from, be attacked by. And here we have 2 flying groups, so a single PC might get flown off with by one of them and then the rest of the party has to go get it back. There's a lot of potential in each of these locations. But it is location 14, New Caverns, that is the focus of this adventure. A jumble of rocks at the base of the chasm wall is obviously the result of a recent earthquake, which has revealed several cave entrances that are now accessible. Of course, the caverns themselves are not new, but rather newly revealed to the surface. At this point along the southern edge of the rift, a large jumble of boulders and other debris is visible. This is a result of a recent earthquake, which caused a small section of the cliff face to shatter, exposing 4 cave entrances, plus 2 others that are not noticeable from the ground. There are 3 such caves at ground level, and another one approximately 15 to 20 feet up the face of the cliff. There are actually 2 more entrances at that same level, but one is much smaller and difficult to spot from the ground, and the other is a secret door that covers the entrance to the Darrow flying craft. Wait, the what? The Darrow flying craft. This thing gets 49 rooms, and there's plenty to do in here. The atmospheric encounter table aims more at creeping out the party instead of eating resources in combat, because the cavern rooms are already stocked with danger. Whether dealing with gnolls, the mad psychic Darrow, an ogre magi couple miffed because their slaves got taken, giant spiders, and more, there are opportunities for diplomacy and faction play besides a straight-up murder grind. The gnoll and Darrow leaders have agendas of their own, and I would have never guessed what the Darrow are up to, and it is intriguing. Did I mention they have a flying ship? one you can capture and use for yourself if you can figure out how to work it. There are strange rooms like one with a talking iron head that scares the gnolls, undead with backstory, environmental effects like crystal caves that are as harmful as they are beautiful, and encounters that help build the caves in my mind's eye. Room 44 is so creepy and descriptive, I have to read this to you. Cave of Skeletons. The walls of this cave are damp and are covered with bands of bright color, russets, greens, and pale yellows. The bright glint of mineral deposits can also be seen when any light source is brought into the cave. But what catches the eye are the dozens of humanoid skeletons that are partially embedded in the walls. Some are almost completely covered with stone, while others project almost completely from the walls. A dwarf or hill gnome will also notice, if the skeletons are closely examined, that the skeletons are in the process of petrification, with the bone being replaced by minerals. Centuries ago, these skeletons were animated and would have been used as soldiers in distant days past, but have been gradually encased in stone and rendered useless. An animate dead spell will still work on them, however, and they can be used to grab and attack creatures within 3 feet of the walls, but cannot move and have an AC of 10. I've never seen a room before like this, and I love it. It oozes an unspoken history. Who animated these skeletons? Who had them here? Why did they have them here? How did these people get killed in the first place? And the fact that the caves have done what caves do and slowly petrify this organic material, it just puts me right in the place. I feel like I can see this place, all the little creepy, ghastly details of it. Now that's good writing. The final room at the bottom of the dungeon is a portcullis of enchanted steel that can only be opened with a special tool that can be found elsewhere in the dungeon, and the Darrow will shut the gate if they think they won't be able to stop invaders at the caves. They have good reason to bar the door behind them, because this gate leads down into the part of the Underdark that is their home and the setting for Module R2. After that, we get some new monsters that I really enjoyed, like the rainbow fungus, the ghost panther, the purple living crystal, and giant scarlet widow spider. We also get the new magic item called Darrow Flying Ship Small, implying there's a bigger one out there, manned by blind, insane psionic dwarves. Overall, I love this thing. While there's a few details that I wish were a little more fleshed out, when I asked Joe about them a while back, he told me to calm down. Those get handled in the next modules. And I'm not going to whine about the named locations not being more fleshed out, because Bloch gave me enough to use. He didn't write anything that wasn't playable as written and stuck me, the DM, with having to figure out how to make it work. He didn't do that at all. The module is perfectly playable as is. I just liked what was here so much I wanted more. Normally I include a publication history and noteworthy facts about the modules that I review, but this is an adventure from a small independent publisher, and those kind of details are harder to come by online. They just might not be available. And I say, if you can't get the details you want from other people, well, go find them yourself. I asked the author Joe Bloch if he wouldn't mind coming on and talking to us about the module and fill in some of those gaps for me. And lucky for us, he not only agreed, but he's also good at talking. So I expect we're going to have a good time right about now. All right, my dear friends, welcome back, our dear friend Joseph Bloch, the Greyhawk Grognard. It's good to see you, sir. You doing all right today?
Doing great. Thank you for having me on.
Well, good. And we've been diving deep into R1, into the Great Rift, and this is mighty fine work. And
Thank
to
you.
help establish the lore, to establish the historical record for the works of Joseph Bloch, another blockbuster, if you will. Let's start with the question, what inspired you to make this module?
Even though it's a Greyheim adventure, they're very much inspired by the world of Greyhawk, obviously. And I've always been fascinated by the Rift Canyon in Greyhawk. So I wanted to do something that people could use sort of analogously in that area. It's a very underdeveloped area in the world of Greyhawk in terms of written material or in lore and stuff like that. You know, there's a few things scattered about here and there. Living Greyhawk kind of did a lot more with it, obviously, because that's what Living Greyhawk did. Was fill in all the corners. But in terms of like the regularly published stuff, there's not a lot there. So it's very much of an open canvas, and it's such a compelling area. I mean, it's right there in the middle of the map. It's just right in front of you, so it draws the eye. So I wanted to do something you could adapt easily for that area.
And I appreciate that even though you're adding to a underdeveloped area, as you put it, you didn't take up all the space with it. You added a little bit, and there's still plenty of sandbox room for DMs to make the place their own, to where people, when they're making their head canon based on what they read, it's not cluttered there's still plenty of room to explore and plenty of things to do. So good.
That's the way Gary Gygax did it too. Back in the day, you'll notice they had the gold box and the folio, but they didn't have like gazetteers of specific countries like they did later on with post-wars stuff. Where they would go into great detail about Furiondi and Ayuz or the Great Kingdom, or things like that, where they kind of really developed the world in terms of detail and everything. Gygax didn't do that. He showed, he didn't tell. So all of the detail that you get about the world of Greyhawk after the gold box from Gary was in the form of adventures. So, and they only showed what was necessary to run that adventure, and everything else was just kind of left. There were a lot of hooks dangling that the DM could take and just run with. I like that approach myself. I don't like to do entire books about regions because that doesn't leave a lot for the DM. And I'm very much a seat of the pants DM. So I very much like to have a lot of open space that I can just take something and run with it.
And now this area, in reading R1, I got this feeling this is a Wild West, lawless area. I mean, it's the brigand kingdom. Why did you go with that feeling?
That comes from the original that inspired it, from the Bandit Kingdoms. And there's something very interesting about the map. And I don't know if you can see it behind me, but I've got the Darlene map there. And the Rift Canyon there is surrounded by a set of badlands. And it just so happens that the color scheme on the map, it's gold and such right around that area. And that reminds me very much of the old Westerns, that kind of almost sepia kind of tone to it. And that also inspired the cover art, which I chose for this public domain cover art, but it's of the Grand Canyon. So it's that kind of connection, at least in my mind, of, you got the color scheme, you've got the big canyon that invokes the Grand Canyon and the Westerns and stuff. So yeah, you're right. There is very much of a plus, the very idea that in this rather lawless territory. It's not like the kingdoms around it are, that are very well patrolled and everything. It's the brigand kingdoms. It's just a bunch of warlords. So it very much lends itself to that kind of feel.
And I like that sense of isolation that the players will have to deal with. There's significant room for gain in this module, but the rewards, the threat level, it's all there. And I love how you did it. Now, the Flynn ruins you put in there.
Yes.
They screamed out at me and I wanted more, but I appreciate that you left room for the DM to make it their own. But did you have a particular history in mind for it when you put it there? Or are you just like, let's see what they do with that?
In Dragon 293, there was maybe a page that describes this ruin flan fortress, and it's called Faralaz. I wanted to take that. I didn't feel like I needed to do a big, setup of it, but I did want to throw that in as kind of like an Easter egg for the real Greyhawk fans who would see this and say, oh, yes, I recognize this. Maybe somebody else has done a write up of it and they could plug it in for their own thing. Or if it, like you say, it's one of those dangling hooks that are scattered throughout a lot of my stuff and a lot of the earlier writing. They're there intentionally for the DM to just use as they want to. It's not ever intended to be fully fleshed out. It's there for the DM to use as a scaffold.
Okay, so Dragon 293 is what you said.
293.
That's
Yeah.
if we want more details on Farallows, there might be something in there.
Well, something that you could adapt.
Okay.
For the Greyheim,
Yeah, Greyheim. Greyheim's totally different
it's
than
easy
Greyhawk.
to be inspired by Greyhawk.
I've got a bunch of the old dragons and I read them as they were coming out, but I wouldn't have remembered that. So this is the Greyhawk lore master. That's what we got right here. We got the top shelf guest. So this place, it has a sense of history to it, as you pointed out, that it is part of the setting. But was the Haunted Mist, the Ghost Panther, the different elements of haunting, ghostly apparitions, was that in the original material or did you add that?
That was me. And it wasn't even a conscious thing on my part. I was just casting about for interesting stuff that I thought would work in the module. And I guess it just kind of happened that way. It wasn't an intentional, oh, I'm going to make a theme of hauntings and stuff like that. It just kind of worked out that way.
I read one of the examples of the mist on the random encounter table in the overland area. I thought that was really neat, that you could be surrounded by this mist and you hear the sound of armor and you're never going to see it. And kind of like in the dungeon, it seemed like the random encounter table more focused on atmosphere and
Yes.
an aura of threat as opposed to just bags of hit points being thrown at the players.
I find I like to do that a lot just as an aid to the DM because, if the DM thinks that the players are riding too high and they need to be taken down a peg with a gray ooze or whatever, you can do that on your own. But sometimes you want to be inspired to do some things that aren't all that usual that you see around. I like to toss in that kind of stuff too. A lot of times I don't even roll a die on those tables. I'll just pick something.
And speaking of the dungeon, so you gave the Darrow a flying ship. So
Yes.
it's not bad enough that there's crazy blind psionic dwarves that also have some powerful spellcasters running around kidnapping people, but you gave them a flying ship. Why? Why did you do that?
Okay, this goes back to the origin of the Darrow, the literary origin of the Darrow. Have you ever heard of the Shaver mystery?
No.
This was something that started in the 40s in pulp magazines. This guy, Richard Shaver, wrote a series of articles about how he had been kidnapped by these creatures called Darrow. He spelled it with one R, but that's where Gygax got it from. And taken to their underground realm in the Hollow Earth, where they used ray beams to influence what was going on our Earth. So everything from crime to accidents and everything was because the Darrow were manipulating things and working their mischief through their ray technology. And he escaped, and then he wrote these things. And as soon as these articles started appearing in the pulps, they got tens of thousands of people writing in saying, yes, this has happened to me too. I was also captured by the Darrow. The Darrow lived next door to me. The Darrow caused my car crash. It was a phenomenon for years and years and years. They actually wrote a couple of, they collected it into some novels. I Remember Lemuria and the Return of Sathanas. And if you
What?
read these, they are that crap crazy. But this was this whole thing starting in 43, I think. And it went on until like the 50s, into the 50s. And then it became bound up with the UFO phenomenon and the hollow earthers. And it was a whole big thing. And that's where it originally came from. So I thought I'd throw a little bit of that lore in there to kind of beef them up, because although I love the Darrow, you don't really see a lot of them. That's one of the reasons that I wanted to write this module. I wanted to write a module about the Darrow, because I think they're just the best bad guys since the Drow. And I wanted to do something that featured them. And in fact, the whole series kind of took a different turn. If you ever do R2 and R3, they're way different than I had intended. But that's what inspired the flying ship, because the Darrow in Shaver's thing, they used UFOs and they traveled around.
Dude, when I was writing these questions for you and I was really thinking over why would he give the Darrow a flying ship, it occurred to me, wait a second, did he come up with a scenario in his head to explain like the human abductions, and in fact it's Darrow, and I had no idea about that backstory that you just gave me.
It's fascinating to read this stuff.
The Darrow must have turned on their crystal and hit me with a beam to let me know that it's true.
The best part is that literally tens of thousands of people wrote in and said, yes, this happened to me too. He's right. I believe it. And it's just crazy. How this, and it was a huge influence on a lot of stuff, and that's where Gygax got the idea, and I just kind of went back to that well.
Wow. So the module specifies Darrow flying ship small. That implies there's a bigger one.
Yes, it does.
Where is it?
It's coming. Like I say, the series of modules took a very different turn than I had originally intended. Originally, it was all going to be about the Darrow, and you were going to go to a Darrow fortress city, and that kind of stuff. And it just kind of didn't want to go in that direction, and it went over here. But I got more stuff to write.
Okay, because I looked through R2 and R3, and I was like, where are the other ones? And they weren't there. And not to spoil R2 and R3 for anybody, but you're not going to see it coming where this thing winds up. You're just not going to. I didn't, for sure.
I didn't. R3 was as much of a surprise to me as it was to anybody, because I did not. That was not where I intended this to go. Like it had its own idea.
See, this is why one of the reasons I love talking to you about this stuff, because I had no idea any of that was going to come. And now that I'm wildly entertained by it and have to know more, and which is what you want out of an interview. You want to know more.
Exactly.
That's amazing. Okay. So there's more coming on the Darrow.
Actually, right now I'm working on a whole bunch of different things, including another one of the pirate modules that you liked so much. And I've got other stuff on the inners. That'll come eventually.
Okay.
They'll be in R4.
I'll be patient, and you better not die. Okay. I'll be patient. You stay alive. And
let's hope.
To bring us down a little bit, just to even us out as we ease out of the interview, the talking iron head in room 37, is that an homage to the bronze mask in the sample dungeon, the Tower of Xenopus, or is
No,
it its whole thing, separate
I
inspiration?
just kind of came up with it. If anything, it was a little more inspired by the Great Stone Enigma in the Castle Greyhawk dungeons, but not really. I just wanted something. I think I might have been watching Ancient Aliens and saw a thing about the Olmec heads or something, and that might have gotten in my mind. It's just supposed to be there as a throwaway thing that the DM can expand on if he wants to, but it's not really connected to anything. It's just one of those little things, the little mysteries that I like to just toss in there and let the DM worry about.
It was cool. I liked it. And the cryptic sayings that it had. Did any of those have a real meaning, or is it just whatever meaning I read into it?
I would say don't look for too much meaning in.
Because it
Although
didn't seem to
there might
add
be a few
up.
clues here and there that pertain to the other levels of the dungeon, but nothing really beyond that.
Well, my dear friends, I hope y'all enjoyed that as much as I did. And just like with the R series, I did not see this coming, the wild twist this interview took. So, Joe, I appreciate you again, sir.
Thank you. Thank you. Happy to be here.
You can purchase R1 on DriveThruRPG, and it is available in both print copy and PDF. I bought them both ways, the PDFs on DriveThru and the hard copies from Joe at the conventions I've seen him at. One thing I like about how Joe does business, which he absolutely does not abuse or misuse, so he can send you a PDF copy as well. If you're looking for a modern grade of adventure writing, buy his stuff, because he's got the goods and he is a gamer's gamer. He is a master of the lore, committed to excellence in game design, and he is in this for all the right reasons. And there you have it. If you have played or ran R1, please let me know in the comments. I want to know how that went for you. And what did you do with it? Did you customize it, or did you run it just as Joe wrote it? If you enjoyed this review of Into the Great Rift, I too enjoy it when people like and subscribe, so you know what to do. And I thank you for your time, and that you chose to spend it with me and Joe. And now that we dear friends part for now, I wish you nothing but the best.